The best characters are always weak. So-called perfect characters are fun to watch, but timeless characters are the ones who are human. And it's weird to say this about the guy who feels like a villain, but Mayuri is one of Bleach's most human characters, which is brilliantly illustrated in his fight against Pernita. So in this video, I'd like to analyze this fight, discuss the details that everyone misses, and explain why someone as terrible as Mayuri Kurotsuchi is still considered one of Bleach's best characters. As a matter of fact, Kubo has gone on record saying that Mayuri is his favorite character to draw. Now, part of that is the fact that he has all his crazy costumes, but more importantly, it's because, besides Kenpachi, Mayuri is the most expressive character in Bleach. And to that point, I'd like to ask an important question. What is the goal of crafting a character? Is it to make a character perfect? Maybe, but the problem is that perfect is kind of subjective. I think we all know that when you try to make everyone happy, you usually end up making nobody happy. When making a character, or anything for that matter, it's more important that you make something you like. And part of the reason Kubo probably likes Mayuri so much is because of how his growth represents some of Bleach's most important themes. Which brings us to the Pernita fight. So Mayuri confronts Pernita, and in response to his weird nerve ability, Mayuri reveals his new Bankai, specifically his new altered Bankai. And we know that this is very much in character for Mayuri. His Bankai itself is a result of his scientific experiments, and we already know from his fight in Hueco Mundo that he's always modifying that Bankai. In his own way, Mayuri is a character that is always seeking growth. But let's take note of how his altered Bankai works because this presents a problem. The new Bankai can grow by adapting to its enemy, but this requires it to gather data on its enemy. This second part is important because when Mayuri thinks he has Pernita beat, it's soon revealed that Pernita can grow and gain new abilities whenever he uses his nerve ability on his enemy. And therein lies a big problem. Mayuri believes that he finally crafted the perfect Bankai, but the problem is that it relies on the abilities of others to grow. If the enemy can overcome their own limits like Pernita does, then the Bankai isn't as powerful. And like Pernita, the Bankai can only grow in battle depending on the abilities of others, which is exactly why Mayuri is almost defeated. In this fight, he is unable to grow on his own. If it weren't for the help of Nemu, then Mayuri would have probably lost this fight. And it's in this moment when Nemu comes in to help and we get her backstory that Kubo illustrates Mayuri's major weakness. But before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So at this point, Nemu saves Mayuri from one of Pernita's arrows. Interestingly enough, Mayuri calls her out specifically because she acted on her own right after she demonstrates that she can learn without him. So then Mayuri comes up with his next plan to beat Pernita, but when he's about to be attacked, Nemu breaks away from the plan and saves Mayuri with her own abilities. It's with this context that we then transition into Nemu's backstory. We see Nemu as a child ask Akon why Mayuri calls her Nemu instead of her real name, Nemuri, which means sleep. Akon explains that Nemu is the result of Mayuri's dream to create a soul from nothing, but that he also believes a dream while awake is silly, hence why he named the project the Nemuri Project. Akon then goes on to speculate that the reason Mayuri calls Nemu by her nickname rather than by Nemuri is because Mayuri has achieved his dream but would be too embarrassed to admit it. Then Nemu asks if Mayuri would have continued calling Nemu by her full name if she hadn't figured this out. In response, Akon says that he wouldn't because Nemu is his masterpiece, and then follows that up by saying there's no way you won't evolve. So there's a few takeaways from this flashback, but let's start with how it creates a contrast between Nemu and Pernita. As we pointed out, Pernita can adapt to its enemies, but that requires a connection to that enemy. Meanwhile, Nemu is always growing on her own. So while Pernita can adapt to any enemy but is dependent on that other person, Nemu can always evolve on her own. In this sense, Nemu is superior to Pernita because although she's defeated, she can evolve independently. And because of our comparison from before, we also know that this makes her superior to Mayuri as well. Throughout this fight, it becomes painfully clear that Mayuri probably would have died if it weren't for Nemu. She saves him not once, but twice. On top of that, it's only thanks to Nemu's body that Mayuri is able to finally beat Pernita. So this is how Nemu reveals Mayuri's major weakness. Like Pernita, Mayuri is constantly evolving, but he always needs enemies to adapt to. Unlike Nemu, he can't evolve on his own, which explains why Nemu was his dream. He wanted to create something better than him, something that could grow on its own. And this takes on another meaning when we get the iconic exchange between Mayuri and Szayelaporro. Szayelaporro appears before Mayuri and asks if he felt despair at the death of Nemu. He references their previous exchange where Mayuri claimed that scientists should despise perfection because it means you can no longer evolve. He then accuses Mayuri of negligence for believing that Nemu was actually perfect. In response, Mayuri swats him away and admits his negligence, strongly implying that he did in fact believe Nemu to be perfect. While he doesn't expand on this, using the flashback from before, it should be pretty clear why it is that Mayuri believed Nemu was perfect. As Akon pointed out, Nemu was Mayuri's masterpiece because she was always evolving. More importantly, she was always evolving on her own, even learning lessons and using abilities without the help of Mayuri. That's why for Mayuri, Nemu was a dream come true. In this sense, Nemu is both perfect and evolving. In other words, she's perfect because she's imperfect. Unlike Szayelaporro, who wanted to literally be perfect, Mayuri wanted to create someone that would always grow on their own without the help of others and in that sense be perfect. Obviously, what it means to be perfect can be hard to describe, which is exactly why I brought up the question from before. What is the goal of crafting a character? In theory, a perfect character wouldn't have any flaws, but obviously, if you create a character like that, then it's pretty hard to resonate with them because they don't feel human. And it's for this same reason that it's important to draw a parallel between all this stuff with Mayuri and the end quote from Aizen. In the end of Bleach, Aizen explains how Yu Hawak wanted to combine life and death to create a world without fear, something that you could call a perfect world. But as Aizen points out, there's something admirable about persisting while also living in fear, which is why people call this courage. And this relates perfectly, pun not intended, to our case of Mayuri. Pernita could be described as perfect. Szayelaporro claimed to seek perfection, but an existence without flaws is flawed by nature, because if you are without flaws, then you lack the kind of qualities that allow you to overcome new challenges. It's the issue they ran into with the original Superman. Superman could fly, shoot lasers, take bullets to the chest. It wasn't until after they introduced kryptonite that Superman's fights became worth watching, because now Superman had something he would need to adapt to. It's the same reason I like the older versions of Superman, like in the original animated universe. Superman is no fun as a god on Earth, but as Clark Kent, the man-child with X-ray vision that still believes in Santa, or the superhero who can't even win over the city girl because he grew up in Smallville, that Superman is way more fun because he's humble, afraid of girls, and gives people the benefit of the doubt because he has the courage to believe in the good of people. In short, he's human, and that's what makes him a perfect character. Not that he can basically beat everyone, but that he has flaws and is able to overcome those flaws in a way that feels human. But, like I pointed out before, it's easy to confuse these two meanings of perfection, which is exactly what happens to Mayuri. He dreamed of a soul that was always evolving, but as Szayelaporro points out, once he achieves this, he falls into the trap of believing that Nemu is literally perfect, which is illustrated when he says that which you believed to be perfect has been destroyed, which mimics the relationship referenced by Aizen in the fake Karakura Town arc where he explains to Shinji that cowardice is relying on others for security and protection. And it's this kind of reliance that ties Mayuri's arc into Bleach's most important themes. As Aizen illustrates, much of Bleach is about how each character determines their own growth and whether they have the courage to face that growth rather than run away from it. This can be seen with characters like Ichigo, Kenpachi, or even Grimmjow, a character that defines his life by his ability to win against others with his strength alone. This kind of courage is something that every character is presented with, but it's presented in a particularly unique way in the case of Mayuri. Because he knows he is flawed, Mayuri dreams of a soul that can grow on its own. He then creates Nemu in an attempt to make his dream a reality, which he admits is an absurd thing to do and also why he is embarrassed to admit his true intentions. When he succeeds, he falls into the cowardly trap illustrated by Aizen. He believes Nemu to be this perfect thing, falling into this false sense of security. It's only when Nemu sacrifices herself that Mayuri is faced with his own negligence. As Nemu explains, it is the act of her sacrifice that shows that she's grown, not the aimless goal of constant growth in some blind pursuit of perfection. The same flaw that ruined Szayelaporro and ultimately ruins Pernita when his own unlimited growth literally kills him. Fortunately, Mayuri is reminded of what he was aiming for in the first place, and just before he passes out, he claims that he has finally surpassed Urahara by creating a soul that can grow on its own. As you can see, it's this dream and these flaws that make Mayuri a human character. He's far from perfect. He's sadistic and antisocial, making him feel like one of the bad guys. But what makes him one of Bleach's most admirable characters is his pursuit of evolution, not of perfection. The courage to always overcome new obstacles. It makes him incredibly expressive as his clothes and abilities are always changing. And of course, his unorthodox desire to evolve leads to some pretty strange and creepy emotions. But more importantly, despite how he might appear, it makes him one of the most human characters in the story. This is why everyone, including Kubo, loves Mayuri Kurotsuchi. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you describe Mayuri? How does he compare to other Bleach characters? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like to join me for another discussion like this one, then check out my live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. In those live streams, I react to new manga chapters as well as discuss other anime and manga topics. Also, make sure to check out my other Bleach videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.